Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Canada and Australia are deepening their military cooperation with an eye on China. In a bilateral meeting between Canadian Defence Minister Bill Blair and Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles in Vancouver, the two sides expressed concern about China's expansion of maritime claims in the South China Sea and activity in the Taiwan Strait.
China is pursuing the most ambitious military buildup of any nation since the Second World War. And it's looking to reshape the international system to advance its own interests. It is using force to reduce freedom of movement in the region, and we are concerned by its increased level of military activity in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait.
Following the bilateral, Australian Defence Minister Marles said, "We have agreed to pursue closer collaboration by enhancing the interoperability of our armed forces and by deepening our operational cooperation."
Our cooperation is based on seeking to deter. We are absolutely about working with each other so that we can avoid conflict. That is obviously front and centre in terms of the way in which we are engaging in our cooperation.
Canada's growing interest to expand engagement with the Philippines follows the signing of a Memorandum of Understanding on Defence Cooperation in January 2024 and the arrangement in 2023 to allow Manila to use Ottawa's dark vessel detection system to combat illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. What does the military cooperation of Canberra and Ottawa mean for the Indo-Pacific, and what does it mean for their relations with China? Joining us today are Lai I-Chung, Prospect Foundation President, and Alexander Huang, Council on Strategic and Wargaming Studies Chair. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. President Lai, let me come to you first. So what difference do you think it would make for these two nations in terms of the security of this region?
I believe that probably is the first time that Canada have a defense minister statement with the Australia. And basically, that's Canada for the first time in the post-COVID era, voicing about the security concern in the Indo-Pacific. Although Canada already started its activities, like the November last year, and Canada not only sent its ship to transit through the Taiwan Strait, but also participate in the America, Japan, and Australia, the military exercises. And also this June, this year, Canada also participate in the America, Japan, and Philippine military exercises, as well as sending a ship again through the Taiwan Strait.
So do you see this as a pattern for Canada, that it's increasing its role in the Indo-Pacific?
Definitely. Yeah. So right now that Canada started to, not just about activity, have its public statement and state very clearly about its intention. And I will say that many things, many activities associated with this follow the Canada's announcement of its Indo-Pacific strategy at the end of year 2022. And of course, they also signifies Canada its attitude change toward China, especially after the capture of the two Michaels that China held in exchange for the Meng Wanzhou affairs.
Yeah, Professor Huang, you know, Australia, we know, is an oceanic nation. It's situated in the Indo-Pacific. Canada, we wouldn't immediately call an Indo-Pacific nation, but as President said, Canada did release its own Indo-Pacific strategy. Why is Canada taking such a strong stance?
Actually, Canada is not a newcomer to the regional affairs in the Western Pacific. Ever since the end of the Cold War, the Canadian Coast Guard had been pretty active in working and dealing with the Western Pacific countries. So we had never thought that Canada is not a Pacific country. Like the United States, they all had a long coastline and interest in the Pacific Ocean, number one. Number two, there have been other regional security dialogue that have been going on, and in which the Canadian participation have been pretty active, like CSCAP and other regional dialogues. So I believe that the enhancement of the Canadian involvement, including sending their military assets, sailing through the Taiwan Strait, had magnified that the increasing focus of the Canadian interest in the Indo-Pacific region.
President Lai, when we talk about what we call a spoke-to-spoke arrangement, what do you see in terms of the bigger picture of this lattice work, in terms of this strengthening?
The lattice work system, which was announced by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, I think sometime in year 2022, signifies something that is not just about the U.S.-led bilateral alliances. Basically, U.S. tried to integrate many of those spoke in those alliances to make them to be mini multilaterals, mini plurilaterals, basically, the alliance system. So we have started to have the U.S., Japan, Korea, U.S., Japan, Australia, and also the Quad, and even the British come into the picture with the AUKUS. And now just earlier this year, the announcement about Squad, S as a small or security Quad, that is led by the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines and Australia. So those multiple arrangements sort of coming together. It's not just based on the U.S.-led bilateral alliances, but also improve the interoperability and the communication between those alliances like Japan, Australia, now with Philippines, but now Canada started to come in.
And Canada, Alex, is also looking for a swift conclusion of the agreement called a Visiting Forces Agreement with the Philippines. Philippines has negotiated similar agreements with different names with the US, Australia, and Japan, and Canada will be the fourth. What do these types of agreements enable the Philippines and its allies to do?
The reason for that, of course, is to deal with an increasingly challenging security environment caused by Beijing. And this is a part of a greater deterrence built up across nations in the Indo-Pacific region. I think Canada and Australia, of course, don't forget there has been a Five Eyes, coalition. So there have been sound bases for bilateral relationship or the multilateral since the last century. And right now, the Western democracies in the region and try to, strengthen and enhance those alliance system with exercises and new agreements to cement and materialize in their practice. So we see the naval vessels and other assets that cruise around the Indo-Pacific region. The Visiting Force Agreement is expanding to many. That would facilitate, in case, of course, the basic logic is deterrence, build up the deterrent capability. But in case of a future possible kinetic military conflict, that these exercises and these coalitions, these agreements can immediately facilitate those necessary actions should the allies decide to get into.
So we'll come on to China's reaction. In August, China lodged a diplomatic complaint after a Canadian warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait. Beijing said the act caused disturbance and stirred up trouble. We warn Canada that it should abide by the One China principle, be cautious in its words and deeds on the Taiwan issue. Given the Taiwan Strait is international waters under UNCLOS, what is China referring to? What's its complaint?
That's exactly what China wants to protest against, because China already in year 2021, through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, declared that the Taiwan Strait is a part of the internal water within China. Not only the MOFA said that, but also the PLA explicitly talks about how the Taiwan Strait is a part of the internal water within China. So that any foreign ship that sails through the Taiwan Straits, and although the Chinese MOFA has a more nuanced position, but still, in practices, the MOFA declared that should any foreign ship try to sail through the Taiwan Strait, the prior approval by China is needed. China always considered that to be a challenge to their claim about this. And of course, another reason is that China wanted to seal the status as if the Taiwan is part of China, and recognized by other international players, so that even though China does not really own Taiwan, hasn't really administered Taiwan, but the action by other nations will respect Chinese claim, and one of the most important factor will be their behavior in the Taiwan Strait.
Right. And Alex, has China always had this view, or has it shifted? I mean, UNCLOS was signed in 1982. And China was party to that.
Well, if we want to really get into a strict definition of UNCLOS, Beijing has no position to define that the Taiwan Strait is a internal water. Internal water is the sea area or the waters inside the baseline as defined or pronounced by a sovereign nation. China itself did not ever declare a baseline that beyond its coastline and across the Taiwan Strait. So there's no legal, strict position that Beijing has to declare that Taiwan Strait is an internal water.
Similar to the South China Sea, isn't it?
South China Sea is another term is called historical waters, okay?
But not under UNCLOS.
Right. That's not UNCLOS recognized definition. So the reason why is that China, of course, wanted to use their statement, their actions, number one, to deter foreign, access to the Taiwan Strait. On the other hand, they wanted, through practice, to gradually define that the Taiwan Strait is a area that off limits to foreign intervention.
So that sort of gray zone coercion,
Right.
Changing the norm.
It's part of like a legal warfare. If we do not file a complaint, if we do not dispute their view, then gradually they will build up their narrative.
Right. And President Lai, it's interesting, though, that those freedom of navigation operations that, the U.S. and its allies take and the sail-throughs that they do are actually in disputed waters.
Well, I think for the United States and other countries, their behavior is that they believe this is international water and they have the right to do that. FUNUP sometimes is referring to more aggressive action to really challenge what they think is an illegal claim. I do not know about Australia and Canada, but the U.S. and UK, both nations have very strong and a very long maritime naval history in the whole world. So those are their behavior in challenging what they believe to be an excessive claim and violating, in their view, about international the law.
Okay. Alex, I want to move to talk about Australia a bit more. We focused on Canada. So Australia announced out of the 2+2 ministerial between the two defense ministers and two foreign ministers recently that they would have co-production with the US on guided missiles. There was also, of course, the upgrading of northern bases in Australia to counter China. How do you view this, all these very recent developments, this stepped-up military cooperation between Australia and the US?
Well, if we consult with the history in the last century or during the Cold War era, the Northeast Asia has been much strongly defended. There have been U.S.-Japan alliance, very strong one, or leading one, U.S.-ROK, Mutual Defense Treaty. And for a long time, there were mutual defense treaty between Washington and Manila as well. But if we look at the strength and the involvement, Australia and New Zealand was far away from the Taiwan area or relatively further from China. So in the last century or during the Cold War era, even with a true and functional allied, system, but there was not as proactive as today that Australian had involved in the South China Sea area. And also...
so do you see that Australia sees that not just its values are being, threatened, but that its interests?
Not only business interests. freedom of navigation, free trade, energy shipping, but also, South China Sea, if we go down to the southern edge as claimed by Beijing, it get really close to Australia as well. So I think, just like Canberra had stated itself that they are involved, they are now more active in the South China Sea issue. Another key area is that the Philippines itself is not militarily strong enough to stand up against the Chinese coercion. So countries like Japan and Australia, they are, either encouraged by Washington or for their own interest that they...
Or encouraged by the Philippines themselves.
Right, to get more, interactions recent years. Yeah. The target, of course, is against the expanding Chinese activities in the South China Sea.
Right. President Lai, I want to quote a little bit from the ANZUS Treaty. That's the Australia, New Zealand, US treaty. So they don't have a mutual defense treaty, but this treaty binds Australia and US to consult on mutual threats and, in accordance with our respective constitutional processes, to act to meet common dangers. So I wanted, if you could help to characterize, that mutual threat that we think that Australia is feeling, which is behind all of this sort of build-up and cooperation.
During the Cold War era, and although the major hostility came from afar, and some of the contingency or counterinsurgency happens in a near neighbor. But Australia at that time believed that its geography actually shielded from the major problem, so that they have 10 years of the warning time for the military buildup and preparation. But now with China, that quick advancement, especially in the South China Sea, and also in Chinese activity in Pacific Islands, Australia started to feel that the 10 years of the warning time is no longer there. So that in year 2023, Australia started to have its strategic defense review. And also now, this year, they announced a new national defense, national security strategies. And also that has been touched upon in the Canada-Australia joint statement. And so basically, we're talking about Australia facing the threat from China, and China, that has been the central focus for Australia strategic calculus. And all the related activities is centered around that.
Yeah, because, same with Japan, people often ask the question, if Japan allows the US to use its bases or build bases and station its marine forces or its forces there, then surely that means that Japan, maybe Australia are becoming targets for China should war break out and should they become involved. However, they are still going ahead with this. Alex, I want to bring up the role of the US Marine Rotational Force, which operates out of Darwin for 6 months of the year. And out of that 2+2, there was the announcement that there will be a greater role and that we would be seeing in the region a lot more of this rotational force, even supporting Philippine resupply missions to Second Thomas Shoal. So how significant do you think is this increased role for that particular force? And could this force be used, do you think, even in a Taiwan contingency?
Well, this is a big question, but of course it's a legit one in the war games. As we discussed in the very beginning of today's show, that these are the building blocks, including the increasing presence of military assets as well as exercises that familiarize the regional countries that once, in case that they need to work together, if they have joint training, joint exercise early, to do more rotational, arrangement and familiarize with each other, that will be served, number one, as a deterrent itself. Number two, if necessary, then they can work together. Of course, it can help the Philippines. Of course, they can be used in the Taiwan Strait.
Yeah, because we're not saying that they definitely will. We're not asking the question whether they definitely will. It be a political decision for those leaders of those countries.
Right, of course. You know, the forces in Beijing that have been trained, exercised, and available, I think itself is a deterrent. And what we need to think more deeply in Taiwan is that whether we can be part of it or they will do things without us. So it's either two parallel efforts or it would be a joint effort. That's another issue, not today's subject, but we need to think about it.
Right. Okay. President Lai, let's now turn to China's reaction, possible reaction. So in June this year, Chinese Premier Lai I-Chung, visited Australia to meet with the Australian Prime Minister. This was the first time in 7 years. At that time, it was seen as a thaw. So how do you think Beijing is, receiving the information about all these military announcements?
I believe that in China, they have their own economic problem and that they really wanted to focus upon. But of course, Xi Jinping now is presiding everything. And the Lai I-Chung's visit to Australia is not only about the China-Australia relationship, trying to bring back to the original state.
After 3 years of economic coercion?
Yes, but also China wanted to improve its economic engagement with Australia as well, which is, of course, in Australia's national interest. But interestingly, that Australia did not, because of the economic need to engage with China, started forsaken or weaken its security commitment with the United States regarding Indo-Pacific. And also Canada is another very interesting case, because Canada foreign minister also visit China for the first time since, I think, year 2019 or 20, because and after that there was the long period of the Meng Wanzhou issue and the two Michael being kept as a captive by China on Canada regarding these issues. And so this year's the visit, it will be the first time for the Canadian foreign minister to visit China. But just look at the characterization by Canada and China regarding this meeting. China probably proclaimed that this is the reset of the China-Canadian relations. But Canada, the characterization is that this is just a working visit. It's a visit, we need to talk, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, Alex, perhaps, it was Wang Yi, it was the Chinese side that invited the Canadians. So do we sense there that perhaps Beijing is keener to have this reset?
Well, it can be interpreted that way, but also is a game between Washington and Beijing. Xi Jinping have visited Paris and Wang Yi invited Canadian foreign ministers to visit. I mean, they play cards against Washington's giant or large strategic landscape. That's one level. But these two cases, both Canadian and Australia, highlights that the importance that not only you need to build up your deterrence capability, you work better with your alliance, but also you maintain the communication channel open. You still have senior dialogue and visit. Working on both ways. Tango takes two, and tango means that you have step forwards and step backwards. So it's a measured move by all parties, and I think it's calculated. We understand why Lai I-Chung visited, Canberra, and why the Canadian foreign minister would accept the invitation from Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
We can perhaps work together on an economic level, but when it comes to national security, then we will form the alliances that we need to.
It's multifaceted international relationship. It's not a simple black and white arrangement.
Absolutely. President Lai, final words. So how do you think China will react to this, as we talked about the strengthening of the lattice work, the spoke-to-spoke, all of these different cooperations?
China definitely does not like it. And China will do everything to either to consolidate its own bloc, first from the Southeast Asia, or China and China will also try to do something to weaken the newly established lattice work system established by the United States. So I think more invitation to the Australian or the Canadian or even Japan and South Korea, their foreign ministers and other ministerial visits, and the Chinese and summit-level engagement with the country in Southeast Asia, in which they believe that they could do something to weaken, at least, in that area about the U.S. lattice work system. And also, China probably will also try to enhance and build up its own security bloc along the Indo-Pacific the area,
With
where
Russia.
it started from the Southeast Asia, from the Cambodia, and then in other countries in the Indian Ocean, such as Bangladesh, which right now is in chaos, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, that's been the all-weather friend for China, and even right now all the way into the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, because the Chinese has a big naval basis in Djibouti.
So we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Lai I-Chung and Alexander Huang, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
We bring you stories from Taiwan. Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you. News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's Up Taiwan on Taiwan Plus.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan Plus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.